Oh, hello again. Good afternoon. How are you enjoying so far? Okay. Save the applause for the Chief Rabbi and his great team for making this possible. As I mentioned a number of times, I can't imagine anywhere else in the world a gathering of such an eclectic audience from so many different walks of life. In Israel, I think it's impossible at this point. In America, I don't think it's either possible. So I commend this community for being able to pull that off. So thank you. Okay. The 21st century Jew. That's us. Yep. Believe it or not, here we are in 2019. The Jewish people continues to survive and even thrive. And we've always been blessed with a wisdom, sometimes despite ourselves even, to be able to look ahead and build a better future. But every generation has its challenges and opportunities. So I want to talk about that because I think it's perhaps the greatest legacy that we have is how we will do with the opportunities and blessings and the fact that we are here, souls and bodies, at this time and this place. So of course technology always stands high on top of the list whenever you describe modern times. And technology is a very good barometer for both our successes and also our failures. I'll start with on a personal note. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to go travel to a wedding of a friend. And in the same car we were being driven, I was sitting right near a colleague of mine. We went to yeshiva together many years ago, and I thought it was a great opportunity to catch up. However, he was busy on his mobile phone, texting and texting and texting. So I started elbowing him and this and that, trying to get his attention. I couldn't get his attention for the life of me. And not that I was that desperate, but we were sitting near each other after all. So why not? Finally, what do? You can't get attention of a friend of yours. He's sitting right near you. You know, he doesn't get closer than that. So you know what I did? I texted him. So here I am, sitting here, he's sitting here, I'm texting him. And I'm watching amusingly to see what's going to happen. He looks at his phone, looks at me, looks at his phone, and he's wondering, like what's, he was a little disoriented by this. So he says to me, "Are you texting me?" I said, "Yes, I'm texting you." He says, "Why are you sitting right near me? Why do you need to text me?" So I said, "Because I can't get your attention." She says, "Okay, so wait online." Fine. And that's what I did, but I didn't wait online. I had other things to do. We never ended up speaking. And I thought for that moment that the big question, technology was supposed to free us, emancipate us, and I started wondering who's in control of whom. The machines are controlling us or we're controlling the machines. And when was the last time you had a eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul conversation without any distractions? And not saying 1 minute I got to check the text. And today it's not even rude because everyone's checking texts. So technology is a double-edged sword that has both sides to it. Let me share another episode in my life, which also captures somewhat the 21st century paradox, which is a great paradox. And that is, after I wrote Torah, Meaningful Life, the publisher sent me on a book tour. I had no idea what it was, but they sent me on a book tour. They give you this VIP treatment, red carpet, and just in case it ever happens to you, let me tell you, don't let it get to your head, because it only lasts till midnight, and then you turn back into a pumpkin and nobody looks at you. So yeah, here I am in these 5-star hotels, and someone's driving me, and escorts, everything you want. So the way it works is, at least in America those days, they line up these media interviews, print, radio, television, and then in the evening you speak at a bookstore, Barnes & Noble, or then there was a Borders, these big chain bookstores, and you sign books. This is the way it worked. Today it's less prominent. So there was the moment, and I had fascinating stories of interactions that, now's not the time to go into all of them, but they were all unbelievable. Here's one, Cleveland, Ohio. So I come there in the morning, I land very early. First stop, Cleveland morning television show. So they have these little short interviews, 5-6 minutes, on television live. I walk in, they introduce me to the producer, who's also the anchor woman. She gives one look at me, and I never saw someone so frightened. Her face, she turned pale, and she was about to faint. I was like, taken aback. I didn't know what I did. So I said, is something wrong? Yeah. She says, I never thought that the author of this book would look like you. That's what she said. So I said, what do you think I would look like? She says, I love your book. It's on my nightstand. I read it with my family. It's like one of the most profound books and simple books at the same time. It's changed my life in so many ways. I never thought, what would the author look like? I said, what do you think I should have looked like? She said, I thought he would look like a tall, skinny, secular, sexy guy. That's what she said. So I told her, I thought I do look like that. Perception. Anyway, maybe 2 out of the 3, I don't know, okay. So I wasn't insulted. I did tell her, I said to a lot of people would be insulted by what you just said. But I wasn't. I actually found it very entertaining, amusing. So I said to her, so why don't we talk about that? That's a great opportunity. Why don't you say that on? No, she said, I can't say that. That's embarrassing. So I said, but couch it in other words. And that's what she did. Her opening question to me was, your book is a wonderful book. It's universal wisdom. Anyone can read it, for all people of all backgrounds, relevant, spiritual, psychological, emotional. And wouldn't you be more successful and your message would be more receptive if you looked like one of us? That's the way she put it. Okay, fine, fair question. So I said to her, would you say the same thing to a Saudi Arabian prince sitting with his garments? Or to someone from Jamaica wearing dreadlocks? There you'd probably say, wow, so beautiful that you preserve your tradition and culture. So, and I said, maybe this is a good opportunity for us to dispel stereotypes and maybe talk, instead of judging each other by looks, let's talk about the merit of the issues and just see if we could have a normal conversation. Which ended up happening, and it was actually very good. And I was very happy, because it's a topic I like to talk about, actually. Because we do so often stereotype, all of us do. And so often we'll lose opportunities. Sometimes a person has a lot to say to you, and you'll dismiss them because you don't like how they look, or some other reason. So really, it was a very excellent opportunity, and it captured, as I said, the paradox. There's a paradox I face almost daily. And definitely when I travel and I speak in different venues, and that is, here's a guy looking like me, with a beard and a yarmulke, which for many who never met someone that looks quote unquote orthodox, though I don't call myself that, but people do, seems like a primitive, archaic, even traditional, and especially here, I know in South Africa there's more respect for tradition. In America there is no such respect. So it's dismissed. So you can be very relevant and have messages that are very personable and accessible, but they'll dismiss you because you look that way. So I'm faced with this dilemma. How do you bridge the two? And it's a big question that many people ask. Can you bridge faith and modernity? Faith in a modern world, in a secular modern world. They seem so dichotomous and so antithetical. Just one example. Faith is based, for example, on ideas of moral, absolute morality. Certain things are right and certain things are wrong. Much of the secular world does not accept absolute morality. It's called moral relativism. Depends. Case by case, different communities, it shifts. So how can you bridge such two opposite worlds? As I said, I face this, and actually I embrace this dilemma and this conflict, and I think it's one of the key challenges for the 21st century Jew. Because we've been here for thousands of years, we have an ancient culture, tradition, and yet we live in a world where many of ourselves and our children, grandchildren, sometimes wonder, is it still relevant? Is it still meaningful? Or are we just doing something out of obligation or guilt or fear just to continue something which we all know is not really sustainable if it doesn't have some deeper relevance, because there's a lot of competition out there. So I think to address this properly, and especially to be able to have a bird's eye view and some foresight, because it's so often easy to live in the moment, but to look at the big picture. So to see ahead, you have to really look behind. You have to look back. That's how it works. To understand the future, you have to understand the past. How did we get here? If you know how we got here, it'll be easier to navigate how we go further, and not just be driven by circumstances and random, arbitrary factors. So briefly, not in a extensive or detailed way, I'll just give a little overview of our history, especially Jewish history. But it's really the history of the world in many ways, the history especially of the Western world. And that is, let's just take a date. I'm going to just choose a random date of 500 years ago. Just easier to talk about that way. And of course, all this is in general terms, with many details and many variations, as well as a process. Nothing happens overnight. We didn't turn from where we are today, 500 years, in a snap. It was a process. So where were the Jewish people 500 years ago? All our ancestors. They were either living in Sephardic countries, more Middle Eastern countries, or Spain, Northern Africa, or in the Ashkenazi countries, Central and Eastern Europe. That's where the Jewish people were. America was not yet discovered by the Western world, by the European world. I don't think there were any Jews in South Africa then. And that's where we were. And we were an oppressed nation. Obviously, each time period was a different way, either totally discriminated against and identified as Jews, overtaxed, and to the point of expulsions and pogroms, and even genocides and attacks. This has been our history. But 500 years ago, Jews, 99.9%, even higher than that, there was no such thing as assimilation. There were the rare occurrences of baptisms and conversions, but they were very few. The rest of the Jewish people, even if they wanted, they couldn't assimilate, because they weren't accepted in the secular Protestant or Catholic world of Europe. You couldn't join their universities, you could not join their trades. Jews had to be innovative and to find ways to eke out a living. So even though on one hand it was very difficult times, but internally the shtetl, the Jewish community, was very strong. And great scholarly works were produced. You know, you read Rashi, Rashbam, Ramban, Maimonides. I'm just mentioning a few. We're talking about hundreds. If we didn't know better, the sheer volume of output, you'd think they were living in a very calm and relaxed time, but they weren't. So from a point of view of tradition, it was very strong. And most people were born and died in the same town, the same shtetl. They knew the few people they knew. And that was it. There was no real travel. There was definitely no technology. There wasn't even mail. So on one hand, it was difficult from the outside forces, but internally, it was very pure, innocent, you can even say naive, insulated, and there was very strong Jewish communities. I'm sure they had their issues, but it was very different than our world. And essentially, in every community, there was this respect for the Torah. I'm sure, as I said, there must have been challenges, but that's what you had. That's what you grew up with. In that type of pure environment, there were many things that didn't have to be said. You didn't necessarily have to tell your child, this is important to be a Jew. People picked it up from the smell of the chicken soup in their grandmother's kitchen, because there were no other smells. And they picked it up in the things they read and they learned in the environments. So just imagine a world like that. And this is our grandparents, that's where they lived. That was that world. We're in a completely different world today. What happened? What happened was, again briefly, was the beginning of a new way of looking at politics, at life, at religion, which began essentially in Central Europe. It was called first the Renaissance, then the Enlightenment, and the thinkers began to emerge who began to challenge the authorities of the time. And who were the authorities for over 1,000 years? Monarchs and the church. And no one could question them. There was no such thing as equal rights. There was no such thing as private property. One individual or two individuals controlled a person's life, and no one could challenge it. There wasn't any due process that we know of today. As these winds changed, the first who benefited actually were the Jews, because they were the most discriminated against. And the laws of the land began to be a little more relaxed. And suddenly Jews were allowed the opportunity, yes, to mingle and to join the universities and to partake in the culture and the arts and entertainment and music of the Western world, primarily Christian world. I'm talking right now mostly Europe. In the Sephardic countries is another story, but similar story in one way or another. So the Jews were faced with a dilemma they never had before. Here they have all these new opportunities. They come from a very ancient and strong tradition. What do you do? And they clash in so many ways. Again, nothing was resolved immediately, but generally speaking, in retrospect, we could identify two schools of thought emerged, how to deal with this challenge. One school of thought, which was born mostly in Central Europe, which later would become, or not so much later, in those years would become what's known as Reform Judaism, was trying to address this issue. And there was a line that was coined at the time that said, a Jew at home and a Goy in the street. The best of both worlds. Why can't we reconcile? At home, we're strong traditional Jews, Shabbat, kosher, and so on. But in the street, we are like the Gentiles. The problem, of course, is what happens when they clash. What happens when your Protestant neighbor invites you for a Christmas dinner that's not kosher? So are you now a Jew at home or you're a Gentile on the street? And not to oversimplify it, this was a real clash, and it was not easily resolvable. There was a point where there was an opinion, and that really changed the course of Jewish history in many ways, that we have to drop a lot of the original Torah laws that didn't seem rational or at least modern. So laws like ethics and morality and virtue, great, charity. But laws like purity, impurity, offerings, things that were so-called super-rational or in their mind irrational, that was primitive times. And these are not my words, by the way, and I'm not even trying to criticize it. I'm really trying to just paint the picture of what occurred. And if you use logic, it may make sense. We have to now adjust to new times and make compromises and changes to the point, just like there was enlightenment in the non-Jewish world, there was enlightenment in the Jewish world, and maybe we have to challenge these authoritative rabbinic positions that control Jewish life for so many years. And that's what happened. To the point, just to drive the point home, just to show you what extreme, where it goes, when the Reform movement moved from Europe to America, not that it moved, but some Americans embraced that, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there was a Jewish meeting, Reform Jewish meeting. It's called the Pittsburgh Platform. And they came out with 10 principles of change. And one of them, which is what I want to emphasize, is the principles of change were that instead of Shabbat being on Saturday, let's move it to Sunday. It's not a joke. That was what was proposed. Why? Because it makes it, we're anyway keeping Shabbat, so why not do it the same way that the rest of the world does it, the rest of the Christian world, on Sunday? Now that, of course, was so radical that no one accepted that. It was rejected outright, because then, then we're losing them. Why is this called Judaism? Might as well call it Protestantism. But that's the extent that when you start tampering, where you draw the line. And no one really knows where you draw the line. And in many ways, that is the birth of assimilation, not with bad intentions, but simply two worlds clashing and not knowing how to resolve the issue. So you have to compromise one. Another school of thought was born in Eastern Europe, the birth of ultra-Orthodoxy. And its mandate and its dictates were that we have to do the exact opposite. Because the modern world is now open to us, we need to put on our own blinders and self-imposed ghettos and insulate ourselves from the evils of the Western world. And all its benefits, even the positive ones, we must reject. And they began this almost extreme zealous approach, which today manifests as well, that seeing everything in the secular world as dangerous and threatening. So we need to just lock it out. Just to give an example, a number of years ago, you might have heard, in New York, there was in Citi Field, big baseball stadium, 100,000 Orthodox Jews got together to bemoan the evils of the internet. Irony was not lost on all of us that this was being broadcast on the internet and on big jumbo screens in a sports stadium with the highest levels of technology. And I was saddened by the event in many ways. I understand where they were coming from. I grew up in a traditional home. But I was saddened because they didn't have a solution. The best they came up with was we need to put filters. And then the cynics said that it was the filter companies that sponsored the event. So you can imagine what taste that left. And I'm not dismissing the intentions, good people trying to protect their children, trying to protect them from many things on the internet that we don't want our children, and for that matter, adults to be exposed to. But it just demonstrates the tension and the tenuousness between a modern world and an Orthodox and religious world. So there you have two schools of thought, as extreme as distant one from the other as possible. And here's the fascinating fact. They both suffer from the same dilemma. In many ways, they're exactly the same. What is the dilemma? They cannot find a way to integrate and reconcile between a modern world and God, or modern world and Torah. So one runs and escapes into religion, into self-imposed insulation and isolation, and the other essentially succumbs and says, okay, we'll embrace the modern world and we'll try to be as Jewish as possible, but much of it is lost. That's what you have. But if you think about it philosophically, it's exactly the same dilemma. It's just two different solutions, but the same dilemma is two things can't work together. One runs this way, one runs this way. It's vital for us to understand this because we're all affected by it one way or another. Whatever school of thought you're in, or if you're not in any of them, it still affects us because this is the Jewish world today. So I want to suggest and submit that there's a third option, and that is our real challenge of the 21st century. Okay, so as I said, there are two different schools of thought, and many of us are on the fence, or we don't really know, or we never even thought about it. You know, like that guy that says, I'm still indecisive. I'm not decide like this or decide like that. Where the joke goes, he used to say, I used to think I'm indecisive, now I'm not so sure, you know? So there is a lot of that today as well, a certain type of on the fence. So there is a third option. And it's frankly this third option that I personally came to embrace because I, even as a young man, and I was growing up in a very traditional environment, so I had the extremes of real, what some would call ultra-Orthodoxy. I don't like that name, I don't like labels altogether, but that's what it would be coined as by some. But thank God in my home, my parents were very open-minded. There was no dogma. So though I was taught the tradition in a very intense way, it was not imposed. It wasn't based on condescension and judgment and critique of anybody that's not like you. I did not grow up insulated. My father was a journalist, very well-read man, very global thinking. And that was a blessing for me because by nature, I'm a skeptic. And by nature, very hard for me to fit into a straitjacket. And though I saw my own colleagues and friends suffering sometimes from this trap because their homes may have been a little different, I'm blessed. And it was not due to my effort. I just feel blessed that I was in the right place that allowed me to embrace Judaism on my terms without being imposed upon. At the same time, recognizing the pros and cons. So for me, it was impossible to embrace either of the two. They didn't make sense to me. If you might as well, if you're dropping Judaism, you want to become a Protestant, fine, it's tragic, but at least like ideologically. But I couldn't understand how you can be compromising all your basic principles because, okay, there are opportunities. And the other extreme of locking out the whole world didn't make any sense to me. God created a universe, and he created all these opportunities. So fine, there are things that one shouldn't do. But to throw out the baby in the bathwater, everything is no good because it could be threatening. You might as well, God forbid, I don't want to say the word, commit suicide. This life is filled with risks. That's what life is about. Not just the modern world. Influences. Every child going to school is risky. Who are the child going to meet? Predators out there. I mean, you have to find a life. And Judaism was always brilliant at not just surviving, but figuring out how to navigate and take a positive approach, not defense, but offense. So here I present to you, and I'm sure some of you may have heard it, but maybe not in this context, the third option. But it's critical to remember this. That the third option is based on offense, not defense, which is the second school of thought, and not compromise, which is the first school of thought. But maybe a good way to capture it is this joke they tell about the Knesset in Israel. You know, it's a very feisty place, as you can imagine. And one Jew gets up in the Knesset and says, I have a new idea, a great idea. Instead of fighting with the Arabs and with our enemies near us, let's attack the United States of America. And of course, they'll beat us. And then out of guilt, they'll rebuild us as they did Japan and Germany after World War II. So instead of $20 billion of aid, we'll get hundreds of billions. A brilliant Jewish idea, right? So one old Jew gets up in the back and says in his broken English or Hebrew or whatever, he says, yeah, very nice idea, but what happens if we win? Okay? Right, what do we do? Suddenly you win over America. And now what do? 300 million people, you know, and Donald Trump. Don't read into that, just a statement, you know. So, what does it tell you? That we are great at playing defense. That's what we've been doing for 2,000 years. I would say most of our history. And we've survived. Nobody can destroy us. With underdog, we're excellent at that. But what about offense? When you're given freedom now and opportunities, it's a far different challenge. Israel, as it became a state, almost all the Jews could unite behind the fact that we need a homeland, especially after the Holocaust. It was so obvious. All schools of thought, except maybe a few that were anti-whatever reason. But once you have a homeland, then we have a strong army, and we have an unbelievable renaissance going on in Israel. Now what? And you'll ask all the fundraisers, they said it was great to fundraise when Israel was in crisis, because Jews give when it's a challenge. But when things are going well, and what do we tell our young people? Young people tell me all the time, I'm sick and tired of hearing from my parents, grandparents, that what do we stand for? Anti-Semitism. That's what we don't stand for. What do we stand for? Now when you psychologically and emotionally been playing defense for thousands of years, it's a mindset, that's a new mindset. It's like you get out of prison. Now what do? And that is why it's a difficult challenge today. In many ways, even harder. 500 years ago, the challenge was external. It was enemies, very defined enemies. But it wasn't that internal. Because internally, there was a very strong, crystallized view of what our values were and why God put us on earth and what we're supposed to do with this world and life of ours. Today, the freedoms ironically create the complacency and the indifference in ways, and a certain apathy. Like the guy that asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? He said, I don't know and I don't care. You know, indifference. I don't know and I don't care. It's a kiss of death. But Jews always were trailblazers. We were always pioneers. And each of us can be pioneers. And here's the third option. And it's really based on Jewish thought. It's based on the fact that God created the world, He gave us a Torah, and He anticipated all the challenges. So 500 years ago, we didn't have challenges of modern technology. So it wasn't important to dig deeper and figure out what do you do with it. Or we didn't have challenges of a modern secular world and all its offerings. But now we do. And the answer is that you have to dig deeper. You don't say, oh, this world is just dangerous. If God gave Torah and He gave us the tools, dig deeper and find tools to deal with this new world. Jews were never ascetics. We did not escape from reality. We didn't go up on mountains and just cut ourselves off. We always engaged with the world and yet remained above it. Be in it, but above it. So how do you do that in our world? You dig deeper. And where do you dig? You dig into the Torah. You know which part of the Torah? One that was never spoken before. As I said, the chicken soup of our grandmother's Shabbos soup was enough to, so to speak, inculcate within us a sense of Jewish pride and commitment. Today you have to spell it out because there are many other smells and there are many other odors and there are many other forces in life. So where do we have to dig? We dig into the soul of Judaism, into the soul of Torah. And what is the soul? The soul teaches us that the prayer that everybody knows, the most famous Jewish prayer is what? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That last word, Echad. So Abraham, monotheism. Everyone thinks Echad means one God and not many. Echad means much more than that. It means one reality and not many. So that's a theological question. Do you think God exists more on Yom Kippur at the Har HaBayis, at the Temple Mount, than he does on a Sunday afternoon here in Johannesburg, in a convention center that's not a synagogue? So you think about it 1 second. Of course, God is indivisible. You can't split him into two. That's exactly the point. There's one reality. God is within everything that exists. Not only in our holy activities and sacred activities of prayer or Torah study or bar mitzvahs or Yom Kippurs or in synagogues. That every fiber of existence has it pulsating within it divine energy. The mystics put it this way: there are divine sparks everywhere. And each one of us is allocated with a certain amount of sparks to redeem, to free. And it comes down to even a simple thing like taking a cup of water. You make a blessing on it and you recognize that this water is an opportunity. What is the opportunity? For you to be able to elevate it and use the strength that you get from it to do a good deed. Not just self-indulgence and not just satisfying your thirst, but it's getting strength to change the world in some small way. That's essentially what Jewish mysticism, what we call Pnimius Torah, the soul of Torah, teaches. Now, it was always known between the lines. It didn't have to be spelled out. The mystics, the few great leaders and giants 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, always knew it, and it's documented. Books like the Zohar. But it was a book that was very exotic and very cryptic and inaccessible. But as the years rolled on, the leaders that truly understood the new challenges taught a third method, that you don't have to escape and you don't have to compromise. You need to dig deeper and say, all these new opportunities are really divine opportunities for us to use to sanctify them. And I'll give a few examples to make this very palatable and very simple. So it's essentially saying we don't have, what are we, escaping from a world that God placed us, the soul, into this world, and say we're afraid? There's a classic question an apostate asks Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud. If God didn't want idolatry, he should have destroyed the sun and the moon, and that way you don't have sun worshippers and no moon worshippers. Rabbi Akiva simply answered, he said, God, due to fools, God's going to destroy his world, because they don't understand what the sun and moon, and they're misusing it. So commentary, the Tesis Yontif says right there, he says, why didn't he follow up with a question? So why didn't God destroy the fools? Because we have free will. That's life. We are always presented with two choices every moment of our lives. Are you going to use this next moment for selfish reasons or for some giving selfless reason? We always have this choice. Are we going to use it for a divine purpose, or are we going to use it for our own selves? And that's what Judaism has always taught. But as I said, years ago, centuries ago, it did not need to be emphasized because it was a given. And the challenges were not quite like they are today. Today we have to spell it out, that every gift, just like sun and moon, there's technology. Technology is not man-made. The machines that tap into technology are man-made, just like electricity is not man-made. These are forces in nature that it took years or centuries or millennia to figure out, and now we tap into them. And when you tap into them, you can use it for nonsense, you can use it for business, you can use it for selfish purposes, or you can use it for divine purposes. Give one example. I was, I think I told the story, some of my talks, I don't even remember where or when, but I was invited to a Shabbaton in East Hampton, New York, which is the east end of Long Island. And I'm driving, I stop for gas. After I fill up my car, there's a fellow there, a young guy, 18, 19-year-old guy, and he's parking cars, he's a parking attendant. And he says to me, am I staying for the party? There was a club there, nearby. He'll park my car. I said, no, but I'm going to another party. What kind of party? I told him it's called a Shabbat party. And he was very intrigued, so I shared with him what it is. Then he asked me, what do I do? I said, I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, a teacher. Teach spirituality, psychology. So he said to me, do you have an email list? Yeah, here. He gave me his email, and that was it. I moved on. I went to the Shabbaton, came back home, gave it to my office, and he got on the list. He started receiving these emails. I never expected to hear from him again. More than 7 years later, I received an email from him. You probably don't remember me. I was this parking attendant, a little hick kid, and you probably didn't know I was Jewish. And tragically, my parents were killed in a car accident when I was very young, 2, 3 years old. And I was moved from one foster home to another, very bad life. I never got any opportunities. I have no idea what Judaism is. And that's why when I met you and I heard what you have to say, I was intrigued. And I have to tell you that your emails have become my Judaism. I pray with them, I study them, and he started using words like Torah, Tefillah. He says Hanukkah was just Hanukkah. I celebrated with your emails Shabbat, and he's listing every holiday. And I saw he really knew it well, and he was like into it. I literally began to cry. Said to myself, wow, maybe technology was created exactly for that. Because the likelihood that I would have invited him to a class in New York, that he would come, most likely not. But here in this place, without any extra effort on my part or my office's part, you press a button. It goes to 30,000 people, go to 30,001 people without extra penny. No extra cost. That can change a person's life. That was impossible 500 years ago. It was impossible 50 years ago. That's how we have to think. That all the modern technology is there for us as a gift to use for the divine purpose. And not only is it not a threat, it's there for us to use it in the correct way. Does it have risks? Everything has a risk. Lighting a fire has a risk. It can cause terrible damage. Or if you contain it and channel it, we must have fire in our lives, warmth. Water also. Everything has potential, both extremes. But Judaism teaches we don't have to be afraid of the world that God created, because it was created exactly with that purpose, to give us the choice, to be a partner with God in creation. God provides the resources, and we have to be wise and not fools to understand what these resources are for, to use them for some greater purpose. This is the way a 21st century Jew should think and look, because it's no longer about a world back then. Now, why the Jews then did not see it that way? Because things came quickly. Remember, there was no technology, so everybody tried their best. And I'm not trying to judge or in any way criticize. But here we are. My father, as a journalist, used to always say there are 3 types of people: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. We have to be ones that make things happen. We're not victims to the world around us. We look at every situation, and even things that may seem setbacks and difficulty, you turn it into an opportunity. And what is it? A spiritual opportunity. As I said, divine sparks. Here's a story that always touches me and it always inspires me. And I hope it will do you too as well. It's a story with the Baal Shem Tov. He had a colleague student, his name was Rabbi Chaim Rappaport. And he sent him once on a mission. He comes back, mission accomplished. But the Baal Shem Tov wasn't satisfied. He wanted to know, how did he travel? Okay, it seems like irrelevant, tangential, so fine. He says, the first night I stayed at some inn. The next night, there was no inn to stay. I camped out at the side of the road. In the morning, I woke up. I washed my hands. I said my prayers. And then I sat down to have something to eat. And I noticed a spring of water at the edge of the road. I went over, took a cup, and made a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shehakol niyeh b'dvarei, and drank the water. Baal Shem Tov jumped up excited and said, That spring of water was waiting from the beginning of time for you to come and make a blessing on it. That's the story. Think about the implications of that. I traveled many places, some places that I don't think any Jew ever walked. Like, for example, speaking to Sri Lankan monks. How you like that? I have other stuff like that too. And I always remember this story, reminds me of, you know, in the words of Robert Frost, the road less traveled. You travel in the wood and the road converged. Here's a road that everyone travels on, and then there's a road less traveled on. And I chose the one that less traveled on, and that has made all the difference. I think back about Abraham and our pioneering forefathers and foremothers, patriarchs and matriarchs. That's what they did, and they knew they're doing it. They paved new ground. They were pioneers, trailblazers. And I always feel the opportunity is there. That perhaps that street you're walking on, or that person you meet, or that water you're drinking, or whatever it is, has been waiting from the beginning of time for you to come and do some good deed and elevate, using the mystical terms, the spark within it, and you change existence. And when you do that accumulatively over thousands of years, you change the world in a real way. Today, that's not a matter of faith. Physics teaches how the universe is intrinsically connected. Subatomic particles sense each other. The butterfly effect. You do one little thing in one place and it has a tremendous effect. It could be millions of miles away. In the words of Maimonides, always see that everything is balanced. And all we need to do is one act and it could tip the scales. The ripple effect. Today, call it viral effect. We know, you can send a message right now, I'm speaking now. It's not being broadcast live, but it will be up online. Potentially 7.5 billion people could be watching it. I'm not saying they will be, but it could be. See, we have to always be optimistic. And that's the way you have to think, because it's all opportunities. Imagine teaching our children, yes, of course we have to put on our locks on the doors, and we have to warn and be afraid of different concerns and dangers. I'm not suggesting not to be prudent, but above all, to think like a leader, like a commander-in-chief. There's a challenge, let's figure out how that's another opportunity. And that's the challenge of our times. Now, if you ask me, the Jewish leaders of our time have yet embraced this challenge, I will refrain from answering. Why? Because there's a lot to be done. But I will say from my end, it's clear to me like the day that this is the future of the Jews. It's the only way. To play defense is almost impossible. This phone here, there's no defense. You can't put up a ghetto wall. There's no defense. Everything is now, there are no more walls. So the only defense is offense. And we have the tools. So though in a short discussion like this, I can't go through a whole training, but I would encourage, and not just encourage, I think it's our responsibility and obligation to go back wherever we come from and challenge your rabbis and find the books and find materials and find answers, an antidote to any one of the challenges. A challenge, figure out where is the divine spark in that challenge. And perhaps discover that that challenge was waiting for you to achieve that. And all the world is waiting for you to accomplish something. It's a whole different way of looking at life. People say, I'm bored. What do you mean bored? There's divine sparks everywhere. Everywhere you go is an opportunity. That type of attitude can really change how we think, and above all, really fulfill the destiny of what we are as the Jewish people. This is the 21st century challenge. We're at the infancy of technology. Some people say where technology is now is where television was approximately in 1930. I know we all think it's all advanced, but there are new things coming and being much more greater challenges, but also greater opportunities. Every one of you, you have your sphere of influence, you have your connections, your way of looking at things. Everyone's here trained in some way or another, your expertise. It's not enough just to be an expert. Think, how can I use my expertise and my field of experience to turn it into something more divine, something more transcendent, something that I could say that perhaps I was given these gifts because the whole world is waiting from the beginning of time for me to come and do something that no one ever did. That's how a Jew should think. I think all of us should think. So, my friends, this will be my last talk here, at least this time around. Now that I can breathe a sigh of relief, I will tell you, I didn't say it till now. It's my 26th talk here since last Thursday. I started out in Cape Town, That was not a request for applause, frankly, but thank you. Then Durban, Cape Town, Durban, and now here, Johannesburg. And beautiful crowds, beautiful people. You are great people. You're so kind and gracious and appreciative, and it's really very heartwarming, like a family, a mishpacha. But I want to tell you one little secret that I did not share, and I didn't tell it to the chief rabbi, but now I'll say it since I'm coming to my concluding remarks. Right a week before I traveled from New York to South Africa, I went to see a voice doctor for the first time in my life because I was sensing for the last 2 months a hoarseness, and I usually am not hoarse. So first I thought it was a cold. I'm sharing with you, this is a type of group therapy, so I'm just venting at this point. Okay, you don't mind. If you don't mind. Yeah. And they discovered a polyp on my vocal cord. Okay, what do you think about that? Now I'm going for 2 weeks to South Africa, and I have to speak basically 3 times a day. And I have to tell you, I must say God was kind, though I sensed the hoarseness at times, but really I was able to pull it off. So maybe it was you, or I don't know what it was, but I just feel I should say that as a voice of gratitude that my voice did not give away. I do have some exercises I'm doing. I don't know if they're helping, but so I wanted to just share with you. So maybe this polyp was waiting from the beginning of time for me to come and overlook it and ignore it and be able to continue giving these talks. Now, I'll tell you this, just on another personal note, I love to sing, and I would have concluded with a niggin, to be honest. I have a song that I'd like to sing. However, because of my voice, I don't know how it's going to go. So if you indulge me, I'll try, and if I embarrass myself, so be it. You know, maybe I need that humbling. Or if you guys vote that I shouldn't try, then I won't. So it's up to you. Okay. I know I've been told to finish already, so since they did squeeze the lemon for everything it's worth, that's me. So maybe I'll just go over time a bit, okay? So actually, this is a song I sang. I mentioned Sri Lankan monks. This is a scene you'll never believe. So I was invited to speak to a group of Sri Lankan monks who came to a museum in New York, Crown Heights, due to their cultural exchange, certain obligations that museums have to share. So I'm called, it was between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I go and I see these around 30 monks in these Buddhists in these orange robes. They all speak English. And so I was asked to say a few words. I get up there, I start speaking. So I thought it was appropriate to speak about some mystical idea, Rosh Hashanah, spiritual renewal, energy renewal, and that's what I focused on. Now, I'm sitting in the front row like this, and I was completely, the way flustered, because as a speaker, I like to feed off the audience. You want to see the vibe, you want to see if but they're trained to be stone-like, like Sphinx. So whatever I said, no jokes they didn't laugh at, the sad stories they didn't cry at, there was no reaction. So I had no idea whether they heard anything, whether they appreciated, didn't appreciate, am I off base? So I decided, that's it. Okay, I'll pull my secret weapon. I'm going to sing a song. So I asked them permission. Yeah. So I decided I'll sing a Yom Kippur song. And I know for sure, and I remember the story with the Baal Shem Tov, they never heard a Yom Kippur song, I guarantee you. And I confirmed it later. So I felt like I'm doing, treading a new path here. Like I said, maybe from the beginning of time, these Sri Lankan monks were waiting for me to sing them a Yom Kippur melody. And this is the song I sang. And I said, I hope I can pull it off. And if not, I apologize, okay? So this is what I sang for them. And I'll tell you what happened afterwards. Ananayano. Nidhi Ananayanayano. Nidhi Ananayanay. Oy Narayanayano. Nidhi Ananayanay. Ay Narayanayano. Nidhi Ananayanayano. Okay? So, and here's my concluding line. So you could put down the sign, finish. I'm finished. Okay. What happened was, literally their faces changed, the monks, and I could see it had a dramatic impact on them. Right afterwards, I went to speak to them, and I said, let me ask you, did you hear what I said? Yeah, we loved what you said. It was so deep and me moving. But we're trained when the master speaks, you just listen. You don't react. What about the song? We couldn't control ourselves. So I felt very good about that. The power of a song. So I want to thank you again for your kindness and attention and indulging me. And be proud 21st century Jews to know that you are carrying the baton in a long marathon that began thousands of years ago, and now we're asked to move it to the next generation. We have our challenges, but we have tremendous opportunities, and we have each other. So please see me as a resource, as a friend, as an ally. Any way I could help you in your spiritual journey, to me that's the greatest honor. And I'm very accessible. You can go to meaningforlife.com/live. We set up a whole series of array of materials you can feel free to access. I also was told, as I mentioned in my previous talk, that my book, Torah Meaning for Life, will be available at the bookstore, Kohl bookstore, as of tomorrow. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I hope we all can complement each other in this great cosmic symphony and make proud ourselves, our families, our communities, and the world, and God, who gave us the gifts and opportunities. And all the souls throughout history can look to us, the 21st century Jew, and say, yes, you've done your part. We're all happy, we're all proud, and we march toward the Messianic redemption immediately. Begula amitis vashlema b'karev mamash. Thank you so much.